Good morning. This is the Board of County Commissioners 2024 through 2025 biennium budget deliberations. It is Monday, October 24th, or Tuesday, October 24th, 2023. It is 9:18 a.m. This session is set to go until 4 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. We are starting this meeting today with the Public Sales Tax Justice Fund, going through the Public Sales Tax Law Fund, Diversity and Equity Council, review of Office Department budget requests. I'll go ahead and do introductions. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. Vice Chair Ty Menser in the boardroom, as well as Commissioner Gary Edwards. We have interim county manager Robin Campbell, as well as assistant county manager Rob Gelder. And we have the budget team present. And I'll pass it on to our county manager and to make an announcement. Go ahead, Robin.
Thank you, Commissioner. So good morning, and this is just an announcement regarding the live stream of our meetings. For the near future, we have technical difficulties with live streaming. Basically, our equipment is mismatched, and what the result is that the live stream is choppy when it works. So we will be recording every meeting, and the recordings are good. And we will be posting each meeting by the next day. So if you're trying to follow along, we apologize for the quality of the live stream, but you can go and watch the entire meeting, the recording, if you'd like to see what you miss. So that is from now until we're able to obtain new equipment. So probably for the next couple of weeks. And with that, then I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to open our budget business for today.
Yes, thank you, Robin. We are here today to talk about the 2024-2025 biennium. 2 weeks prior, we were going through presentations from our offices and departments, and this week we're going through deliberations. Today we'll be speaking with the sheriff to talk about the public safety sales tax and what he may have to present for that revenue source. So I'll pass it right over.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone, and thanks for having us back again today. You should have each received the public safety sales tax phase-in of positions document that we sent out. So I'll just kind of go through the beginning portions of that. Obviously, you can each kind of read it. It's so simply that someone of my math skills can understand. So it does contain a number of assumptions. It assumes that proposition number 1 passes by a vote of the people in November. It assumes the county will start receiving revenue from the public safety sales tax in June of 2024. The revenue receipts are projected to total $10.4 million for the 2024-2025 biennium. The revenue estimates were basically reported by the budget office staff. And expenditures for the phase-in of the 34 FTEs are estimated to total $9.5 million for the biennium budget. One-time startup costs for commissioned staff for a vehicle, body and in-car cameras, radios, mobile computers, outfitting of equipment, and basic law enforcement training total $143,000 per position. That does not include salary and benefits. Ongoing equipment replacement contributions of approximately $22,000 per commission position for future replacement are also included in fiscal year 2025 for the positions established in 2024, if that makes sense. So you have a startup cost for the purchase of the new vehicles and equipment, and then the ongoing cost, which is basically our ER and our replacement fund. The one-time startup costs for civilian staff include the chair, printer, computer, scanner, which total approximately $500 per position, and then ongoing equipment replacement contributions of $500 per civilian position for future replacements. And same thing, that starts in 2025 for the positions created in 2024. As you can see, based on the revenue projections, the phased-in approach, it really just kind of it slowly kind of ties into revenue projections. So in the second quarter of 2024, there will only be 1 deputy position added at that point in time. And then in the third quarter of 2024, when that next payment comes in, would see the 11 additional FTEs, which include 8 deputies, a sergeant, a detective, and a legal assistant. And so one of the goals that we have for this, the phased-in approach, is to not just add all the deputies at one time, because we need the legal assistance support, and we also need the supervision to come with that. So we can't add a bunch of deputies without also adding in that extra support staff and supervision. So fourth quarter 2024 shows 7 additional deputies and a sergeant. First quarter 2025 shows 2 deputies and 1 detective. And then second quarter 2025 shows 1 deputy, 1 sergeant, 1 detective, and 1 financial operations assistant. And we add that in for 2025 because at that point in time, we'll have approximately 23 new positions there, which is going to create additional payroll and financial for our financial services bureau. And then in third quarter 2025, we see the 4 additional deputies, and then to finish it out, quarter 2025, we see the additional 2 deputies and 1 detective, which totals out 34 FTEs. Like we've talked about before, that's 25 deputies and 3 sergeants, 4 detectives, 1 legal assistant, and 1 financial operations assistant. The big pieces for this is that as we are continuing to ramp up our backgrounds and things like that we've had conversations, we've actually seen pretty good improvement in the last month. We have 6 conditional offers out, which is more than any prior month. So we're starting to see the return of investment on the background services. But there is a good chance that even in third quarter 2024, this will mostly remain as vacancy savings, most likely, as we continue to try and ramp up the background. One of the things the public safety sales tax will do is we'll be going back to HR to look for more background investigators. I mean, to hire 34 FTEs over the next 2 years, we're going to have to continue to ramp up that ability, but we're looking good so far. The last part, I can let Heidi, because these numbers start to get too big for me. If you have any questions about the fund balance, essentially what Heidi's done here is she's estimated the ending fund balance for each quarter to make sure that we, obviously sales tax is not as consistent of a stream of revenue, so we wanted to make sure that we had a buffer in place so that we never had to come back and cut any positions or anything like that. So part of the phased-in approach was Heidi laying out each of the different in-fund balances so that we always have a healthy in-fund.
Yeah, so this fund assumes a 3-month minimum, and that's how we've designed the phase-in, is making sure that at the end of that biennium, we're close to, I think we're $600 below the minimum fund balance, which is a 3-month operating. And then as well as out into 2025, I think we're about $2,200 right under the minimum fund balance. Like the said, we'll have vacancy savings, so I'm not too concerned about not being right at or over that minimum fund balance. So again, the projections, or the, I should say, the phase-in of positions are done with looking at what the anticipated revenue is going to be, what the expenditures would be if we follow that phase-in of positions, and make sure that we're maintaining a ending fund balance that can cover any dips in revenue.
Yeah,
Questions?
I have no question.
Okay, question?
I have almost no questions. This looks really well thought out, so thank you. The question is, shoot, I lost my question. I think it was about you've got law and justice, so 75% P, I'm assuming that's being considered law. And,
We're really creative.
yeah. And is that going to be, are they going to be in separate funds, so to speak, so they're managed? Okay, so that way nobody's worried about,
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure that seemed like the right thing to do, but I just want to make sure that that's how we're doing it.
It is the cleanest
Yeah.
way we can manage this.
Okay, that's all I got. Sounds good.
The last piece
Thank
that's
you.
in here is the mental health co-responder stuff that we talked about, but those aren't FTEs, that's a contract. So the plan for that, I mean, there's obviously, not only are there gonna be vacancy savings, but we've created quite a bit of a buffer in the revenue. So that'll be a future conversation with the board in the event that that Proposition 1 passes, we would come back, and all we're doing with that is we're trying to extend the contract out with Olympic Health and Recovery. Right now, I think we pay them approximately $200,000 a year, I want to say, for the scout team. And we would probably be looking to basically double that to get 24/7, which is, just so there's no confusion about what the mental health portion isn't in here, it's both the FTE stuff.
And is it I'm assuming that it's your belief that the scout team investment is, sort of paying off?
100%. Yeah. I would argue that the scout team is probably the best thing the sheriff's office has done in the last decade.
And just for clarification, that scout team is funded out of the health budget, not the sheriff's office budget. I believe it's treatment sales tax, if I remember correctly. That funds
Yeah, I know at least some of it is. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Sheriff, my question is in regards to one of the needs you stated in the past, and wondering what the capacity is with the proposal you have put forward in terms of finding a new location. You've said in the past that you want somewhere where, both your deputies and your detectives are in the same location, and being that we're in a leased space right now, it's really hard. So just kind of wanted you to hopefully touch on that.
Yeah, and I'll let Heidi talk about, there's a second proposal that does include projections with like a bond in there. And so, yes, you are correct, especially as we move forward. Currently, the detective, our support services bureau, is located with me over at the courthouse complex in Building 3. Then we have the field operations bureau, which is located in Patrol. We've been in front of the board a number of times with our issues at that building. It's now leaking on our detectives, or our sergeants and their offices. So we've got just a number of issues going on at the building. It still does not have internet, or high-speed internet, I should say. And so the issue that we're going to have is that if Proposition 1 passes and we add 34 additional positions, at that point in time, we are not going to have any space. We are already maxed out capacity. And like we've had conversations about the atrium and the county's need for more space, we will not have any space for the new sergeants. All of our sergeants already share an office. So we couldn't split that up any further and make them go 3 to an office. It's already pretty tight for them. So we have been on the lookout for a new building. Our target range for a building would be no more than a $20 million bond, and that includes any renovations that need to be done. So we're not looking for the Lacey Police Department special, the $75 million. We're just looking for a building large enough to get all of our staff into one building aside from the jail, and into a building that has high-speed internet and those kinds of things that need the infrastructure, and the parking and the storage that comes with the needs of the jail. So I'll let Heidi speak to any bond stuff. I know that there was a projection in here that she put in to the building, but I'll let her.
So the information that was sent out, the one pager, if you will, that is just for the phase. That does not include the bond. We have a separate one pager, including the bond. The bond assumptions would have been, or I should say, a 20-year bond, and I believe it's $20 million. Bond payments occur in 2 months of the year. So in June, you pay the interest, which is $600,000 for that length of bond and amount of bond, and then also in December, you pay the principal and the interest, which is $1.15 million. So it's a total $1.75 million bond payment per year. So taking that assumption into account, that's going to mean that we cannot afford any positions. What the sheriff talked about was 34 positions, including the bond. We only phased in 31 positions over the course of the biennium, the 2024-2025 biennium, within, still maintain a closeness to the minimum ending fund balance. So that 31 positions ends up being 22 deputies, 3 sergeants, 4 detectives, 1 legal assistant, and 1 financial operations assistant. and also covering that 1.75 million bond payment per year. Looking out in 26, 27, we probably not afford to, given the revenue projections, we could not afford to phase in another position. But when we get out to 28, 29, that's quite a ways out there. Of course, revenue can change, but that's when we can start phasing in our positions.
I would also note that for me, the bond payment stuff is not something that I've just kind of stopped at. The other thing that I'm looking at is there's a lot of push in the area for regional academy run by the state, and so there are going to be a number of different funding options out there for us to seek out as far as assistance. And so I've been engaging with all of our legislators, including legislators who are part of the capital investment stuff up at the Hill, basically talk about, hey, what would it look like if, for instance, we found a building that had capacity to run a small academy out of it? What kind of assistance could we get? Like that. So I'm also engaging in conversations like that to keep all of our options open and see if we can't get state assistance, because what I found is that when you look across the state, a lot of police agencies particularly are getting help from the state to pay for things like training facilities and whatnot, by basically sharing the use out of it. And so the state is winning, counties are winning at the local level. So I've been looking at that, as well as direct appropriation assistance from our state representatives who have been interested in helping us. So this is basically just our, if we did it all ourselves, projection. But I'm hoping to also get some assistance at the state level.
Thank you for that. I was gonna ask, in terms of balancing right out that need for infrastructure, but then as well the need for staff, and obviously they're both your priorities, and just so kind of touching on, let's say it were all dependent on that, right? And of course, I know that we're probably going to be working to try to get, additional funding for this request, but just wondering, kind of walk me through it, like if there's a delay and adding those additional staff on until, I believe, 2028 is when Chief Thompson said, and kind of how that puts in like the pressure on staff, and just walk us through that. Was that clear?
Yeah, so right now, we just hired one, so we have 10 vacancies on patrol. Our background stuff is starting to ramp up. My big thing when I look at the projections here is with the assumption that Proposition 1 passes, it is probably going to take us a significant amount of time to get through all of these FTEs. So even as we look, even if you consider the projections with a bonded building, it shows that we wouldn't start adding positions until the third quarter of 2024, which was 4 positions total. I would suspect that by then we will still be trying to tie up the back end of our 56 current positions, if that makes sense. What the public safety tax allows us to do, however, is there would still be some funding that was coming in during second quarter 2024. And the reality is that, this comes up a lot, right, is you can't even fill your current position. So what is the new tax going to do? Well, the new tax is going to open up overtime opportunities for us to continue to ramp up that hiring process. One of the things right now that we're working to do is try to get all of our sergeants optional overtime to do background investigations, kind of an all hands on deck. But you have to have the overtime funding to be able to do that. And currently our budget is too tight to do that. So I think the big thing with the public safety tax and the money is, in the beginning, a lot of the money is going to be spent on the background process and trying to get more applicants through time. Just today, Lieutenant Brooks brought me the new list for the testing, and we have almost 400 applicants on our list. But we can only get through so many of them because each background investigator, there's 5 of them, can do about 3 at a time. And those 3 at a time take about 2 months to complete. So when you start doing the simple math, we have people, our competitive cutoff for this list is going to be like 84%, 83%. Below that, there's still another almost 200 applicants that we're not even touching. And so that's my big concern, is we need to continue to get that capacity going so that we can touch down into the low 80s. There's a lot of good applicants who work for us. So you can kind of see how it does create stress on the staff. But it is one of those things where money does solve problems in these instances. If you can increase the amount of funding that you have for your background infrastructure, then you can get more people put through the process at one time and get people hired faster. It's the same reason why Thurston County has a slower hiring process and Pierce County has a faster hiring process. They have more people dedicated to the background unit who are doing more backgrounds at one time. So we're just trying to catch up to them in that aspect.
And I would also add that on average, it takes 12 to 14 applicants to get to one hire. So it's not, looking at 2 or 3 people and hiring most of them. It's quite a few that we're going through before we get to a hire.
On your bond configuration there, what interest rate did you use?
I was given a rate of 6% to use.
Thank you. And I believe Assistant County Manager Rob Gilder had a question.
I did. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm not quite sure if it was answered. I think it was, but it was really related to the kind of that phase and approach, if that was actually being informed by the amount of time it takes to fill current vacancies. And then ultimately, how do you track the current vacancies apart from the new positions so that they aren't intermingled?
So the phased in approach that we have here is not based on how quickly we think we can fill the positions. It's based on revenue. So it is simply based on the amount of revenue that's projected that's coming in. That's how we match this up. Quite frankly, if it were based on how quickly we thought we could fill the positions, it would probably staggered further back, just as a precautionary, because again, we're still trying to fill those 56 currently funded positions. As far as, and what was your second question, Rob?
It's just how do you keep track of the two cohorts of vacancies, the current ones versus the future ones?
Yeah, and Heidi will talk to that. I believe those are tracked within our database as far as where the funding actually goes for each position. But I'll let her
Yeah, we have general funded positions, and then in theory, excuse me, these would be funded out of a new fund. So, sorry, there's not a place to look at. So that's how we would be tracking those, as well as when they were established. Because each one of these will be in, if the commissioners were to approve this plan as proposed, we would be establishing essentially 34 new positions. They would be in the position control resolution with an effective date as to when we could start hiring them.
Yeah, so
Thank
those
you.
positions would be tracked across the board. Just like I think we have positions that are funded through grants, for instance. So those positions are clearly noted that they're grant-filled positions and not general fund.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any additional questions?
Commissioner, if I could ask.
Okay.
If this passes and we're able to collect this tax, a number of your requests in this budget were from the general fund, not from the new fund. Is there anything that you were asking for in the general fund that is such high priority that should this pass, we could shift that to this tax?
I believe so, yeah, and we've kind of had those conversations. In fact, I met with Chief Thompson and Under Sheriff Pearsall last week, just to clarify, right? Obviously, the general fund is looking tight. There's budget cuts coming, so we're not projecting any significant growth for the sheriff's office out of our general fund requests. And so kind of the conversation evolved around, how flexible is this going to be with the county? And if we don't get any of our general fund requests and then the public safety sales tax passes, we need that evidence technician, for instance. Can we come back to the county and do a budget amendment? There are some things we'll just want to weight that very carefully, I think, because the Proposition 1, although it is all-encompassing, we've tried to come out and be very clear about what we're going to spend the money on. And so what you'll find, and what we explained during our budget presentation, was that our general fund was almost it was exclusively civil positions, civilian positions within the agency, cadet, evidence technicians. And so, Proposition 1 is, from what we have presented, has very clearly been a more deputies on the road. So I think we just have to be careful if we go and position that to the community that it's more deputies on the road, and then all of a sudden we're putting cadets and evidence technicians in the mix, because each one of those positions is going to take a patrol deputy away. So it's just something to keep in mind. The evidence technician one, I think, one that could come back into the public safety sales tax fund, and obviously a financial operations assistant here as well, just because that position actually adds a detective back into our fold, which is accomplishing kind of the same mission, right? To get more detectives and more patrol deputies available. So, the other ones, I'm not so sure that I would be comfortable asking for out of the public safety Proposition 1 quite yet, just because it kind of dilutes the whole patrol deputies, lower response time, more staffing on the road.
Can I ask a follow-up to that, Sheriff?
Of course.
Just in terms of completely getting what you're saying, but going back to the cadets, isn't the cadets also affirming that statement that you just said in terms of freeing up patrol deputies, right, to be able to, go and take care of the big picture things, and while maybe the cadets are doing reports. So just wondering if that doesn't fit into that as well, and just based on the explanation that you gave during the budget presentation.
It probably does. Yeah. Now that I think about it, the big thing that I think that benefits the evidence technician and the cadets and things like that, and even the animal services stuff, was that those are positions that we don't have to send off to an academy. So once we get the background done and we get the person hired, they have a shortened training period, which means they would provide relief to the general patrol stuff sooner than this continued, it's a really long marathon to get patrol deputies hired, staffed, trained, and out on the streets. It's almost 18 months. Whereas the cadets, you're probably talking closer to 5-6 months from the time they apply to the time that we actually get them out assisting. So there is some point to that, and that's why those positions were kind of front loaded to the beginning, because we can get them hired faster and we can get them helping faster. The patrol deputies and sergeant and detective stuff, it's a long game. So you're probably right.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? I'm wondering, right, with the cadets positions and being that, your staff right now, especially patrol deputies, are facing a lot of overtime just because of the coverage that they're having to do. And so I'm wondering, maybe is a cadet like part of a phase 1 program where you can get them in that 5 to 6 month period, right, to kind of at least start offloading some of that immense workload that your staff is currently facing, right? And while it takes the time to bring in more patrol deputies to kind of ease that workload, is maybe a cadet not a phase 1 but a 0.5 plan, right? Like the plan before the plan kind of situation.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, we see the need for cadets everywhere we go. I mean, last night we had unfortunately a fatality collision where someone was admitted to the hospital, but our deputies, we don't have enough staffing to sit on suspects at hospitals, especially if they're going to be admitted. And the rate at which you're paying a deputy to sit at the hospital, you figure a cadet is going to be half that cost. And we're not taking away from that commission position. I mean, when you got 7 people working, you don't want to go down to 6. And so we see the need for the cadets pretty much everywhere we go. So yeah, I could see that being an early portion of something like this to immediately start offloading work. And the big thing too, right, is it allows us to recruit people at 18 years old. We don't currently offer a position at 18, which means that we're not able to really effectively recruit people out of law enforcement into high school. And that's how I got started in this job. I was a cadet for Lacey at 19 years old. So.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions for the sheriff or for Chief Thompson?
Not a question, just a comment, Commissioner. In your packet, there is a financial plan for the public safety sales tax. For the law portion, I would just let you know that the version that you have in front of you today reflects what's currently in the budget, not the new phase-in plan. Is that correct?
No, this is the new phasing plan.
This is with the new phase-in plan?
Yes.
Then what is the capital expense here?
That is the purchase of vehicles, body cameras, radios, all the equipment.
All the equipment, so that's,
And then the interfund costs are the replacements costs.
that, so this plan reflects this phase-in,
What you don't have
but
in
the
front of you.
dollars don't add up.
Yeah, they do. Don't add it. This is by quarter.
They do. I
So-
was looking at the same thing they do. It's just, this is, yeah, by quarter and the
Right.
other one's by year.
So if you look at fourth quarter on the Word document, 281,392 is the ending fund balance. And if you look at the financial plan,
Oh, the ending fund balance, thank you.
Yep.
No, I'm,
got it?
look at bold as a total.
Believe
Got
me,
it,
I
thank
have,
you.
I have
Never
double
mind.
and triple and quadruple checked this.
Never mind.
Because you,
All right,
there's a massive spreadsheet behind
Yes.
the financial plan. You guys have seen it.
The only thing I would
well done.
only add, the only thing you don't have in front of you is the phase-in approach with the bond.
Correct.
So that's what you would like to see as well. We can
I
provide
can
that.
send it, yeah, we just weren't going, we were gonna focus on the phase-in of FTEs. And I'll
Right.
have that
Okay,
discussion.
And this phase-in approach is different than what you have in your packets.
yes.
We did, the original request was three phases. Each phase was, about a third of the, over 6 months of time. That was when we had no idea what was going on with anything, so that wouldn't be difficult to adjust that packet if it were approved to match this plan. Sorry, Heidi.
And so when we looked at the budget back in August, we didn't have revenue projections. So, we had discussed with, Romero how to go about doing this, and he said, just chunk it out in 3 quarters, or thirds, sorry, not 3 quarters. Starting in January 1, 2024, we knew that needed to change because revenue's not going to, be available. But it was put out there for discussion purposes and.
Well, thank you for the
The update.
additional information and the work that you've done on this.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good job, Heidi.
Good job.
The easy part.
And we have Prosecutor John Thunheim on standby. We,
At 10:30, we're supposed to have,
okay, so we,
So let's see if the other parties could be available
at 10:15,
at,
10:15?
yeah,
That's when we,
So
asked Mary to come back, was at 10:15.
Okay,
public defense, though, Patrick will be joining us on Zoom, so I'd have to get in contact with him to see if he could meet us
so
earlier.
let's,
Is the next piece,
5%.
so it's prosecutor, public defense and auditor,
Yes.
yes.
and then, okay, 10:15.
so we'll go ahead and take a break until 10:15, and Nicole will get in touch with, public.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Okay, good morning. We are back from break. It is 10:17, and we are picking up with public safety, sales tax, the law fund, and,
Pass it right over.
okay, who wants to start on this? Do we want to start with Auditor Hall and then,
Okay. Do you wanna do an
So,
introduction?
so let's start by, framing the conversation. All right, so this conversation is about the new, public safety sales tax. And, in this budget, we are making an assumption that we will be successful and that the, measure will pass. So we want to be prepared in the budget, to spend the revenue when it starts coming in. And, so for the next 45 minutes or so, you'll have a conversation about how to spend the revenue for the justice part, that's the 25% that can be spent on, the prosecutor's office, public defense, and for a ballot processing center, for elections infrastructure and all. So, this conversation today is about what we would bill to this fund. Because it's gonna be set up in a separate fund, separate from the general fund. We've made already, you have a 10-year financial plan in front of you. The only thing in the plan at this time is payments on a bond for the, election center. So we already assumed that in this budget. And we've assumed a $10 million bond.
10 years at 6%.
Yep. So the annual payment is going to be right around $1.4 million.
okay, so then let's start there with Auditor Hall talking about kind of the plan with the ballot processing center and just what her goals are, and then we'll move next to a prosecutor and public defense and then talk about the rest of that. So Auditor Hall, pass it to you.
So we've had in the works to modify and expand this facility for a number of years. We've been in the same footprint since 1985, and we've had substantial growth. So it's very, very tight in there. We're in a new era in elections. There's a threat landscape out there that we've never seen before. That's not going away. And the advice of the Department of Homeland Security, election offices across the country are modifying their facilities to put the security in place to protect election workers. So that's what we really need to do with this facility. It's really, security part of it is really what is going to be the most expensive. And even if this passes, I am not going to stop applying for grants. In fact, I have a meeting this afternoon or tomorrow with Jana, whom you met with Department of Homeland Security, to talk about some available funding. Now, the challenge is still we do not have any EEOP, and any type of justice funding requires one.
EOP.
Equal Employment Opportunity Plan. However, I have been talking with Brandon Weber, our internal auditor, and he has put together a plan that he thinks we could pull one together within 4 months. It will take cooperation from some of the departments, but as I like to say, many hands make light work, and that's how it's structured.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
really quick in regards to the EOP? For that, do you need something that's specific to the auditor's office, or does it have to be countywide?
It has to be countywide.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we've asked everybody in justice we can get an answer from to confirm that information. That's what we've been told. However, we can apply for grants. We just can't spend the money. So, we have an opportunity to apply for the grant and make sure we get in that window. But we won't be able to spend any of the money until we have an EEOP in place. And that's exactly what I plan to do. Robin and I have had some conversations just today and yesterday, going back and forth discussing this.
Yeah, could we add this to an agenda setting, just that way the board is up to date on kind of what the process and timeline is going to be? And
And I'll bring Brandon, who put the plan together, as well as Stacy.
And DV, yeah, that way, at least we're all on the same page on the timeline of that, and we have,
Yeah, and Brandon's met with Dee, so.
okay.
So I'm hoping that we're not going to need all that $10 million. The grants that are coming out, we've been told are going to be large opportunities, and within the Justice Byrne Grant elections, security has become one of the priorities. So, another good thing about this project is we've already had, the architectural drawings are complete. Because if you remember, we were going to start with this project until we had such a shortfall and we didn't have the time to get it done. So we switched our focus to voter registration in the voting center, which is what's in the works right now. So a lot of the work, like architectural drawings, has already been done. We'll of course want to revisit them again based on new recommendations. And, you know, the only thing as far as salaries, and I don't know if this will qualify or not, we will be putting in metal detectors, and we will need people to man those. If that would fit into this, you know, that would be great, and it would take some pressure off the general fund, and I think that would be de minimis compared to the overall costs.
Not knowing if this fits or not, but I'm just wondering, for the metal detectors, for that staffing, do you need that just during, when you're processing those ballots? Is it like a temporary position, or is it year round?
It depends who you ask. We're still discussing that. Personally, I think we could limit it to certain times if we are allowed by law to set stricter entry requirements. So we're discussing that as an association and seeing what we might be able to do with legislation, because right now it says we're open to the public anytime they're there. And when we're not in an election, there's nothing to see, so. See. And sorry, I'm not more definitive than that, but that's still to be determined.
Thank you. I apologize for asking questions as you've gone along, but I'll pass it to my teammates. Any questions for Auditor Hall?
No, I guess, I'm just looking at the, so, $4 million per year for 10 years is the estimate of what we need to pay back the bond that's needed for this project.
Yes.
Robin question.
Is that also at 6%?
Yes.
10 million over 10 years.
There's a chance we could get a better rate than that, but for now, just for the purpose of estimating it. Seems
Chance it
safer to
might be
use a
worse,
higher.
too.
The last bond we issued in a much better market was 4%, so.
Any additional questions for Auditor Hall? Okay, so then, Robin, do you want to frame the conversation for the next step, which would be the prosecutor and public defense?
So basically the question for both the prosecutor and for the public defender is what items that you had requested in general fund, if any of those, would you propose be supported by the new tax? And if none of those, then what would you propose to have paid for from the new tax for your office?
Okay. So a couple of comments for digging into the specifics. One is I do want to support the idea of having election safety into the ballot measure, to whatever degree that we can. The 1.4 million over 10 years, I think, just a little bit off guard because I didn't realize it was going to be that big of a portion of the 25%. But that being said, I think the presidential election, this is me putting my public safety hat on and my looking into my crystal ball a little bit, which I'll be the first to admit is always shifting and changing. I think the next presidential election is going to create some potential public safety issues. And so I really do think that having good, secure, ballot processing is important, in part because, as we saw from the last presidential election, claims of an improper election or improper balloting escalate so quickly, and then they become public safety threats. And I just think it's important for the community to understand why election safety might be in this kind of measure, right? Because well, we had January 6th, and look at the resources that went into that, trying to, do law enforcement around that. And we had our own issues at the state capitol, even not nearly to that extent, but being the capital county of the state, wouldn't surprise me if there was escalation, if there was, claims of voter misconduct or, improper balloting, whatever those might be. We know that they can escalate, and we know the groups tend to want to come to Thurston County to express their voice because we're the capital county. And I'm sure that, people are already kind of making that connection, but I just felt like, let's just connect those dots very directly today while we're talking about this issue. So that initially I was in agreement with the balloting being part of this initiative, the Ballot Center. The next thing is, I just wanted to make a comment about the EEOP, how really important this is, and would wholeheartedly support and lend any resources or other effort that we could contribute to that. We have an EEOP in the prosecutor's office. It was one of the ways that allowed us to get the funding for our dashboard project that's going on, which was a very specific grant for a very specific project in our shop, so we could do an EEOP just for our shop. That being said, our Burn JAG grant funding is tied to this. There's lots of other funding that's tied to this, so to the extent that we can continue to impress how need is, and we've been through that process in our office, so that's why I offer assistance and whatever we can contribute to helping that, because if the county has countywide EOP, that all helps us. So just wanted to start off there. In regards to the tax overall, should it pass and how it gets spent, I'm going to kind of encourage the board to take a little bit of a viewpoint of progression as resources get allocated to the criminal justice system. So, obviously a big chunk of this is slated to go into the sheriff's law enforcement efforts. And I didn't get a chance to hear his entire presentation, so I'm not quite sure what the resource plan is there, but I think it's a very basic understanding that if you start adding resources into patrol detectives, you're going to start seeing additional cases to move into the system. And then it hits our shop, right? And then we go through that sort of, is it chargeable? Is it not chargeable? So roughly a third, give or take, of those referrals will get sorted out at our shop. And then the other, 2/3 or thereabouts, we're actually lower down. We're actually more around 55%, I think, the last time we looked at it. Of the cases that go through actually get charged. And then you've got that kind of work that moves to public defense, right? And so you got a progression of things that are happening in the system that I think requires some intentionality about how you add. So the first add obviously is to the sheriff, but understanding that will have those downstream consequences. So let me just get kind of to it. My strategy for this, if it were to pass, my request would be, and my strategy would be to start taking positions as the funding were to allow. Right now, we're funded through some of the state grant money coming for the Blake work, which is the, having to go back through all of the old possession cases and redo those. That work is going to wind down over time. It's already started to wind down, actually. And then we all have positions that are funded through the recovery money, the ARPA, so-called ARPA money, right? And that's all dedicated to backlog. And again, over time, my goal obviously would be that the backlog whittles down, but then the work on this, on our end starts picking up because the sheriff now has additional resources and things are coming in. Plus, I'll just add that a portion of this tax, as I understand it, is also allocated to cities. And if the cities use any of it to start to enhance their law enforcement, that impacts us as well. We do city felonies at the same time.
Lacey passed a resolution that does that.
Okay.
Limits
So-
it to law enforcement.
Yeah, and that's what I anticipated. So it's really not just the sheriff here, it's all law enforcement. And so that all filters into our shop. Sure.
Prosecutor, I was wondering if you could expand on that, right? You cover all of the felony cases state. But district court also, right, as we've seen the law change and I'm just wondering, can you also kind of describe those impact and kind of maybe not felonies, but those lower level offenses and how, has there been an increase in that? And do you anticipate also there being an increase in those misdemeanor offenses?
Yeah, I would expect an increase in everything across the board, but it's a little bit more complex when we talk about misdemeanors. So with felonies, the very simple, it's much simpler because all felonies that come from cities or the sheriff or any law enforcement agency in the county for that matter come into our shop and go to public defense, right? Just the way that I described. It's a little bit more complex with misdemeanors. So Olympia misdemeanors, they go into Olympia Municipal Court, not part of our system at all, right? And they have their own prosecutor's office, they have their own public defense program, all of that. So that really is a separate and distinct body of work that's not part of our burden. The Lacey misdemeanors come into district court because they contract with our district court to be their municipal court. But they have their own prosecutors and they have their own public defense program. So again, that's not a burden on us, and any burden on the district court is offset because there's a contractual rate that goes with that, right? So conceivably, the cities, if their filings start to increase, they start paying more to the district court for that service, so it offsets a little bit. So I'm not sure that, you're talking about county public safety tax money that need to be dedicated to that. I'm not trying to usurp anything that the district court might say. I just want to be clear that they know they're better than I do. Tumwater is similar because they contract with the district court for their municipal court. They contract with us to be their prosecutor, and I believe they still contract with public defense to be their public defender. But again, any increase in caseload that comes through this conceivably gets offset as we increase the contractual amounts. We base our rate then on caseload, so we take a look at caseload and that we kind of do a prediction and then we reach an agreement in terms of what their payment to us will be to do those cases. And I think public defense does the same thing, and I assume the court does the same thing. So the misdemeanors, that was a long way of saying the misdemeanors I don't think have as much impact on our county allocation, except for county cases that come to us because we do the prosecution for the unincorporated areas. Yeah. So it's a little more complex than the felonies. Did I answer your question, Commissioner?
Yeah, and so I'm wondering with I guess just a follow up to that, and thank you for kind of breaking that down. With the law change and bill number. But with possession now being a gross misdemeanor,
Yeah,
and we've already kind of seen an after effect of that. And of course, I'm just wondering, you know, with the increase, this public safety tax, if it passes, increased
yeah.
deputies on the road, right? Is that a place where you're also expecting an impact in your
Yeah.
office?
Yeah.
And
I think the best I can say right now is, my crystal ball, that is really one of the fuzzy areas. Because I've not seen a big insurgence since the law went into effect. Most of the cases that we come in under the new law are actually cases that were secondary to something else, like somebody gets arrested on a warrant and then the drugs are found in their possession, or they're arrested for a different crime, same thing, right? We've only had a handful of cases come in where it was just the gross misdemeanor, and that's what I'm hearing from the cities too. But it's so early, I don't know that there's any real predicting what's gonna happen over the next year, say. I think it's safe to say there will be some increase, but how much, I think, is really a roll of the dice right now.
And I'm not sorry to interrupt you again, because everything you're saying is really on point. I just wanted to, I'm not sure where you were going, but the progression argument where I would just complete it. I've also talked to Superior Court, you know, as you were saying, like certain amount of cases touch your office.
Yep.
Those certain amount of cases screen touch public defense. Ultimately, they touch the courts.
That's right.
We did not include the courts here. So I've had conversations with Judge Wilson, just making her understand that the board understands that progression.
Yeah.
And we're not, you know, it was a decision that was made, practical decision to frame the way we did in consultation with your office, public defense, the auditor. But we can't forget, I'm just, you know, I think it's kind of where you're going. We can't forget that there's going to be an impact to the courts, and we may have to backfill general fund dollars to make sure that they get, that we don't have a bottleneck there.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is to make this whole system work more smoothly and efficiently and accurately, and greater justice and all those different parameters of what that means.
Right.
But you can't forget the court as part of that progression you were describing.
Yeah. No, your point's well taken. And I didn't mention the court because I was focusing on the funding of this and, who's funded and the impact on them. I will say it also gets a little bit more complex with the court because the court does so much other work other than criminal too, and other than public, quote unquote, public safety. But that being said, I think the ultimate benefit of the tax, if it passes, in terms of looking at the other players, because there's a few, there's the county clerk, for instance, they're going to see more filings coming across, and they'll have increase in their processing capacity needed. Pretrial services, another agency that could be impacted, obviously, because we see more people coming in the system, more need for supervision. Now they have some source available from the treatment sales tax where it's appropriate. But the point is that I think ultimately the benefit for the other agencies is the fact that you'll take the growth in the sheriff and the prosecutor and the public defender from that. You'll take that off the general fund, right? The burden won't be on the general fund as much. So that means hopefully then you can take general fund money and deal with the secondary impacts that they experience. I assume that's kind of where you'd want to go with that. So to kind of come back then to my strategy, and that would be to try to convert positions from project to regular FTE as the work that they're doing in the project winds down, but as the other increase. So for instance, I think the Blake right now is looking at probably that funding ending sometime in is it next year?
Right now, it's June 30th of 24, but there's some murmurings that it may get extended one more year.
Yeah, so somewhere probably between in fiscal year '24 for the state, so that'd be June or July through June of '24, '25. That funds right now what we're referring to as our conviction review unit. So that group of those staff are working on post-conviction motions, appeals, the Blake work as well, which is post-conviction work actually. And then they're also doing things like prosecutor discretionary resentencing requests. So there's a bill that passed a couple years ago that allows prosecutors to take requests to look at old cases and do a prosecutor-initiated resentencing if that's appropriate. If somebody was sentenced under an old law that wouldn't necessarily be true today or something like that. So that work would start to drift over into the public safety sales tax fund. The ARPA positions, I know there's a conversation going on about what the length is there. For purposes of my conversation, I'm kind of assuming that we can get to the point where we can fund those through 26, end of 26. If they're, what is the word? Allocate, obligated.
They're
I was getting there, obligated. Yes, thank you, Robin. So if, you know, and as far as I'm concerned, in terms of justifying the obligation, the work is there to justify getting those that obligate, right? So, and I've offered previously where I can with that. So if that's the case, and as we start to move into 26, it would be the same strategy would be to start to move those project positions over into the funding for the public safety tax. And those would be essentially prosecutors, right? Probably a combination of misdemeanor and to less misdemeanor because of the reasons I talked about, but some additional felony line prosecutors. And then there's support staff that are associated with those projects as well. Same thing, they would come up if I increase the number of deputy prosecutors, I got to proportionally increase support staff. And then there's a couple of advocates there, and then I still am working towards trying to get a resolution with HR and get a job description for investigating, because as law enforcement, I've said this before, I think that law enforcement, their capacity to do follow-up stuff for us or to do trial support stuff for us is limited. And we're seeing an increased need in that, particularly when we're body camera thing has added another dimension to this. And then we're getting more and more like witness interviews and things like that that need to be done as you prepare for trial. So, or even just finding witnesses. In fact, I just did a murder trial where I had a critical witness that we actually couldn't find, and it had a major impact on the trial as far as I'm concerned. So that would be our plan. And then my request would be, in terms of defense, and Patrick can obviously speak to that, then he's got, you know, he'll start to see impacts of that, I would think, as we ramp up. And he's got, you know, formulas that drive a lot of what he needs in terms of resources. And so that's my thought. This can be kind of phased in or ramped up over time. It doesn't have to be, you know, all the money all at one time, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Questions?
I got it. Thanks.
Thank you, Prosecutor Thunheim. I do have a question in regards to kind of thank you for laying it out. I'm wondering if you could kind of go like a level deeper into like how many FTEs we're talking about, right? Those project positions that you're planning to phase into this, the support staff, how many of those? And then victim advocates, how many investigators, just so we have kind of that breakdown of FTEs that.
Sure. And this is also in the slide. So in my original budget proposal, we had one slide. We were actually kind of anticipating this conversation, but we got a little bit ahead of you. So in our original slide deck,
I was going to say, this sounded familiar.
yeah, there's a slide there that talks in depth about this. So if every project position were converted over time, the total would be, I think, 12 FTEs. 6 deputy prosecutors, 4 support staff positions, 2 investigators, and 2 victim advocates. So if I've done my math there, that should add up to 12.
That's 14, right? 6 lawyers, 4 support, that's 10.
And
2 and 2, you said.
Yep, you're right, 14, sorry, 14.
And for clarity, the 2 investigators were originally funded under ARPA, but we didn't get the job descriptions available.
Yeah, and actually, so if you remember back to my project position or my original budget discussion, the project position, we've been in this ongoing back and forth with human resources. I won't go into the weeds on that, but there's a lot of, that's been a problem for us, a barrier for us to get this thing going. If ARPA were extended to 2026, I think I would still initially, and we get that job description, we put it in for this year's budget so that it was on the record, right? But my goal would still be to fund that with ARPA money if we can resolve the job description issue and actually go forward with hiring in 24. If that funding is actually available for 20 through 26, because that's 2 years worth of work I could use with ARPA funding, and then move them to general fund. Now, if we can't get them obligated through 26, the funding runs short, something like that, then they would be prioritized probably to move into the public safety tax earlier. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we have your slide that you presented to us. My next question is kind of following what Robin had asked early on. Knowing that the Axion software upgrade, you've been requesting that, you said it was your top priority just because of the workload your office. And I'm wondering, is that something, right? Just seeing the constraints for having a general fund, is that something that would you be supportive of doing it through the public safety fund instead of general fund?
Yeah, if that was the only way to fund it, I think I would, because that right now that is among our highest priority. Yeah. I think my request would be just knowing kind of that FTEs are down the road and those are people, doing work. I would want to try to exhaust any other possibilities as well. But if push came to shove and that was the only place for it, that would be a place for it to go.
May I ask a question? Go ahead. When we get an opportunity to review the ARPA fund and we start looking at what funds are available, if we find that there isn't enough funding available to extend your positions as you're requesting, are you open to moving them to the PST, the sales tax earlier then?
Yep. Because the strategy here is, assuming I can continue to hire and get people back into the positions I've got openings now, but we're continuing to recruit and hire. The strategy is that nobody walks out the door once I hire them, right? Their position moves to a different funding source and that ongoing funding source, and then, the people that I've invested to train and so forth stay, and we just move them on, right? So if that had to happen earlier, absolutely. But ultimately the goal is to not have to, if I don't have to, lose people when projects end, to not have that happen. Yeah.
Okay, any additional questions or comments to the prosecutor? Thank you, prosecutor. Okay, moving to public defense. Director O'Connor, go ahead.
Good morning, commissioners. I hope you can hear me. I apologize I'm not there in person. I'm up at the University of Washington doing some recruiting at their law school. So I apologize for not being there. Well, I'll just sort of highlight, at least for me, didn't take into consideration into our policy level request for this upcoming biennium, a consideration of if this passes, then what would we fund? So I've really sort of distinguished those two, and so you won't see any policy level requests from me that I presented on that contemplate the passage of the new tax. So, I mean, my understanding of today's exercise was to take a look at what we did propose and prioritize those. But before I touch on those, and I don't need to get into the weeds on those, we've reprioritized them, and we can get that information over to Nicole and Jennifer. But you know, sort of the conversation that John just touched upon, which you know, I'm very supportive of. We have 4 ARPA-funded positions in our office that all have end dates in 2024. And if there's a possibility that those positions, like any other positions that are law and justice ARPA funded through those exercises, we went together through as a law and justice team. And I know I've talked independently with Robin and Nicole about exploring that. Obviously, time is of the essence, but certainly if the criteria changes where we believe that those ARPA-funded FTEs that were funded to law and justice partners, ourselves, the prosecutors, the court, if we can extend those positions through 2026, and I 100% agree with John, the work is there. The work has been there, but for these positions, you know, I'll just speak for myself, and I'm sure others would agree that we could not have gotten the work done that we've been able to get done without those positions. So any opportunity to extend those 4 positions, for me, that's 3 defense attorneys and 1 legal assistant that I lose at the end of next year, unless we can find a way to either cover those as project positions through 2026 with existing ARPing funds. Obviously, if that's an opportunity that preserves some of the revenues, if this tax passes, to start to build up. I think part of this is building up funds for a response to how the sheriff's office is going to be funded and what those impacts are going to be on the system, right? We're being prospective about if it passes, how many new deputies would come onto the road, how many more arrests, and what composition the municipality impacts that you heard about. So it's hard to project what those immediate needs would be in 2024. Obviously, if they're new officers, they have to go to the academy and training. So we could see some impacts maybe in 2024, but we might see greater impacts in 2025 in terms of new criminal cases coming into the system as a result of those types of investments. So in terms of our Blake positions, I'll just sort of touch upon that a little bit too, is that our Blake positions are funded by the Office of Public Defense. So I really would rather have a conversation about extending the ARPA positions for our office. I don't know if there's time this week to have that conversation, so we're all on the same page on whether or not they're eligible. All positions that are ARPA funded for law and justice partners are eligible. I certainly hope so. It's something that I know I've brought up in the past in those team meetings about, can we look at that and explore that? And I know Robin and Nicole and I have talked about it, and love to have another conversation about that, because that would be tremendous. I know that's aside a little bit from the conversation, but we have gone back and reviewed our policy level requests, and we can submit that priority, those priorities. We reprioritize them a little bit, but also in our budget reduction action plan to meet the goal set by the board to reduce our budget, it eliminates a position. And so in reprioritizing this, if this tax passes, obviously we would prefer not to eliminate a position. And so we can get those off to the budget team, and happy to have any further conversations about how we reprioritize those positions. And the last point of Commissioner Mejia about, we're in the same boat with the prosecutor's office on the Axon dilemma. To put it diplomatically, it's a challenge for our staff. It's been a challenge for our staff. I think we've made some improvements, but we'd love to explore any opportunities to continue to improve that digital case management, because it's the frankly, it's the past, present, and future of criminal justice and managing an overwhelming amount of data. And that really impacts staff's job satisfaction. There's really no other way to put it. We try to make their jobs as easy and as efficient as possible, but this will continue to be a challenge, not just with Axon, but with GTAC, and managing GTAC is a different conversation. So.
Can I ask on that question, since I got both you guys here, on the GTAC Axon thing? I mean, can you characterize for me at a high level what the difference is in terms of, by having GTAC, Axon's better? I'm hearing that consistent there. So what does it mean? Like you're not getting the ability to, you're not getting the features to like watch it at faster speeds? Is it more staff time to manage just, like what tangibly are you detrimented by having what you've got versus this thing you're asking for?
Yeah. Well, I can share what I'm hearing from my staff, who are the real subject matter experts on this. And I'd be happy to do follow-up too, if I go and ask them that question. But, and then Patrick may have the same or different input from his side of it. So, the Axon product is a product that was designed specifically for prosecution and defense. So with that in mind, the GTAC really is kind of an add-on, but here are the biggest issues that we face. Right now, we have 2 cities using Axon camera systems. We have the county and Tumwater using GTAC camera systems. The State Patrol is about to go live with Axon camera systems. I forget what Yelm has, but we have 2 systems, right? Axon, we can actually link and take all the GTAC stuff into our Axon system. And so we would just be in one environment for all digital evidence. And it also allows us to upload like surveillance camera evidence or cell phone video evidence. Any digital evidence can be put into the Axon system. And then we manage that. It goes into the cloud. We manage it while it's in the cloud, so it doesn't take up any local storage space. Once we've done our things, so it has redaction features. We can automatically redact faces. For instance, we can identify a face in a video and say, we don't want this face to appear anywhere in the video. So then the software will digitally recognize that face and make sure that it's blurred throughout the video. So we don't have to do redaction, frame by frame or segment by segment. So that's an example of the feature that it has. Once we've done ours, then basically we push a button, figuratively speaking, and it goes to defense, and they have the exact same video, and they can use it in their system the exact same way. GTAC, as I understand it, doesn't have a defense part of it, and Patrick will be able to talk more about this. So we don't send them anything. We end up sending them links, and then I think eventually they have to download it. We are having to actually download certain GTAC video if we need to do any kind of manipulation of that video and do it locally. So all of that is extra time and resources that goes into manipulating that video. And then the other issue I'm told with the GTAC is it's technically in the sheriff's program. I don't know what else to call it. So there's a retention that's set by the sheriff, and then if we thought, well, we'll just set our retention on it. If it's our video, we just reset the retention. But there's a problem with that. Wendy, help me out.
It sets it in the sheriff system.
I'm sorry, just for the microphones, do you mind coming up here?
This is Wendy Ireland, our support staff coordinator, she's one of the subject matter experts that I was referring to.
So we would have to set it in the sheriff system. There's just copy there. So the sheriff then has to keep it based upon our retention, which is much longer than theirs. And so then they have it, if they have a public records request, they have it. And body cam and dash cam is very time intensive to redact for public records.
For public
purposes.
records. So the Axon is the other part of it in terms of it making it much easier for us to be able to, you know, do video redactions and things for public records, which is actually different than what we might do for the discovery process. Patrick, do you want to add anything to that? What I'm being told by my staff, I just will say is that, you know, I really pushed back hard on that 95% thing that came out during the IT. My staff would say it's never going to get to where we really want it to. GTech will never be where we need it to really be to be as effective as the Axon system. And so we're kind of asking people to dig a hole without a shovel, right? Or with for us.
And again, that's about functionality development, and I'm thinking dollars and cents. Like, it's gonna, if you're gonna need more employees to manage because of the cleanness of software, it's us to say no. Like, we're not gonna come back and say, well, we need these 2 FTEs to do kind of public records and stuff like that. As staff. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, I don't like to make decisions that, you know, based on money that don't save any money, so.
And if you'll recall, the top request in our general fund package was 2 FTEs, but that was alternative with Axon, right? So it's either Axon or 2 FTEs, because we figure we'll need at least 2 to make do, if you will, with the GTAC Axon difference.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about as we move forward into this is my understanding is that there's a possibility that the other agencies that are now on GTAC might move to Axon in the future at some point. Obviously, that is unknown. But if that happens, we're already there because we'd already be using the Axon environment for everything.
That was going to be, thank you for bringing that up, because I know I've heard from the sheriff's office perspective, right, that GTAC is also causing some issues for them, and they're having some struggles and wanting, you know, in the future to kind of move towards a system that, well, yeah, and so they kind of were wanting to be on the same system that all the jurisdictions were. That way there's also some continuity and in the system that everyone's using was also one of the, some of the feedback that I heard. And so wondering, right, just throwing this out, I'm not sure if this might be a Sherry question. I know we're going to have a presentation with her, but just throwing that out there. If we're to do this investment, right, thinking, is there a possibility, I don't know, start those conversations with Axon and see if there's maybe a discount we can get, right? If we shift this part of it first with the sheriff coming after a later date, that way there's at least some sort of continuity in it, and then we're not, you know, completely doing just one thing and then after that having to do another contract. And
We're
again,
already aware that the sheriff wants to shift, so I believe the sheriff's done a little bit of work on that, and we'll make sure she's ready to address that when she comes.
thank you.
I'd like to hear Patrick's point on this.
Yeah, I'll just give you, and I didn't get a chance to chat with John before this, but, you know, we, obviously, you know, we both presented on this issue and asked the board to fund, you know, an Axon Justice Premier Suite. And we certainly would support that for, you know, for our office as well. But to your question, Commissioner Menser, just pragmatically speaking, you know, this digital evidence, John sort of touched upon, and I think you've heard in our presentation, the administrative burden it creates on staff, right? Legal assistants, paralegals for just managing the data. And then the cost and expense to the county to try to have to store, at least for us in GTAC, to have to store that data either in our case management system at expense or on the county network. But for the lawyers, the pragmatic impact, at least from my staff, and the biggest frustration with my staff is time. right? So each defense attorney has an ethical obligation to review every piece of evidence in every case. And so your garden variety arrest these days, say a felony offense, typically has anywhere from 15 to 20 hours worth of body cam footage. And that's in every case. So our lawyers are ethically responsible and obligated to review all the footage. Now, what can expedite that is things like transcription services that come and transcribe every video clip, so you can sort of cut to the substantive portions of the video where there's dialogue of evidentiary value, et cetera. So there are ways to improve it through solutions like Justice Premier, but right now that's a tangible impact. So if you were a defense attorney and you got 4 new cases and you had 60 hours worth of video to review on those 4 cases, you have to manage your caseload. And for me, they have an obligation to report to me that they're complying with our state standards of indigent defense, which is based on the number of hours they work. So it has an impact on the number of cases our defenders can handle when they're receiving voluminous amounts of hours of footage that I don't have a solution for them to reduce the time it would take them to just sit in front of a screen and watch what typically can amount to 75% of just innocuous video footage from, an officer driving to the scene or whatever. So it really does have a financial impact on, at least on our office, in terms of number of clients that we can represent. So with this data, if I don't have a way to reduce the time attorneys have to spend looking at it, then I have to give them less cases, creating more cases that I need to figure out how to assign to other lawyers or to conflict counsel. So it does have a real tangible impact on the volume of cases that, at least in our office, that we've had to try to manage as best we can.
Thank you. Any more questions? Patrick, I'm going to ask to kind of around the same question that I asked the prosecutor in terms of your number 1 priority, right, which is the administrative services manager. And I think this is in connection to and just listing out, just seeing what your priorities are. Is there any of those that you would, that are coming to the top of your line that you're like, I need them desperately now, that I would be in favor of doing it through the public safety tax?
Yeah, so we've reprioritized our priorities because the number 1 priority is funded through our budget reduction exercise. So I'm setting that aside because that position's funded with our budget reduction proposal. So we meet the cut funding that position. So setting that aside, we have reprioritized the other priorities or the other policy level request with that position out of the equation because it's funded by our reduction. So yes, and I mean, I can announce those here or send them to your team or send them to Nicole, but we have reprioritized those. We basically have 3 positions that we would be looking at prioritizing. Again, our first priority would be adding a paralegal to our Superior Court team. That would be our number 1 priority. We have 1 paralegal for 14 lawyers. We're asking for a second position there. And then our second priority would be to add another investigator to our office, bringing our total to 3 investigators, criminal investigators, to stop outsourcing investigations and to provide more investigation for our attorneys. And then again, in our budget reduction exercise, we had to eliminate a legal assistant 1 position. So that's not going to be a policy level request that you see, but that's an ask that we would ask if this passes, to refund that position so we don't eliminate a position. And then I've sort of already spoke to what could be a possibility in 2025. It's just a matter of an approach. So if the ARPA funding positions in our office, which again are 3 defenders and 1 legal assistant, if we can extend those end dates to 2026, that'll give us some capacity to deal with what we anticipate would be more cases to our office. And then similar as was suggested previously, I think by John, is looking to then making those permanent positions after 2026. But again, the big linchpin question there is direction on can we convert those ARPA positions into project positions through 2026.
Thank you, Patrick, and I'll rephrase since we can't, there's a supplanting clause in the resolution. It would be adding a legal assistant, not.
Right, so we would need to add one, and that's the question that I had as well. So we would work with the budget team if that's something we need to, put forth as a new position.
Okay. And then I imagine we're gonna be having ARPA conversations later on this week with our budget team, and kind of we'll be discussing all of the ARPA requests that we have gotten, these included.
Right, and we have, as Patrick said, both Nicole and I have talked to him regarding the potential of extending positions from 24 through 26. And it all comes down to whether or not any position is obligated. If we come up with, and as I've said before, I think we can easily build a case that our positions are positions with end dates that are directly tied to ARPA are obligated because of the way we do employment letters. That could essentially be seen as an obligation. And so if that applies to one position, it applies to all the positions that we have structured in that way. So prosecutor's office, public defense, and possibly others that we have would be covered by that interpretation.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Anything anyone here would like to add?
So the budget team will work with Heidi, and we'll work with Jose to get the same type of proposal, if you will, as we got from the sheriff's office, so we can ensure that it would fit within the amount of money that we're anticipating from the new tax.
And as the auditor says, I know that she's going to
Absolutely.
keep looking out for grants, and I know that she has requested from the Strategies 360 team a meeting with Senator Patty Murray, and Senator Sam Hunt has agreed to go with her, so that's something that we're gonna be working and making sure that we schedule and try to make sure that, we're getting as many resources from other sites
Yes,
as well.
we like to spend other people's money. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming and laying out your proposals. It's time for.
11:45.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and 11:45. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take a break till 11:45. Yep, 30 minutes.
11:45.
11:45.
We're gonna recess until 11:45.
Okay, we are back from break. It is 11:57 a.m. and we are picking up with the Diversity and Equity Council. And so we have some members joining us this morning, and I'll pass it to Devi and then we can do introductions and get to the conversation here.
So thank you for having us. My name is Dee Ogden, the Thurston County Racial Equity Program Manager. With us virtually is Juliet Lawson-Hall, our current chair of the Racial Equity Council, and Evelyn Clark, who also serves on the Racial Equity Council. And they're both here to provide input and perspective on advocating for approval of the stipend budget request. So I'll dive right in and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues to discuss. And then at any point, if you have questions, feel free to chime in. So in front of you is a budget request for about $114,000 to fund stipends for all of the county advisory boards and commissions. That estimate was I would say, conservative estimate because it assumes that every member of every existing council, and it takes into account positions that may not be filled, but up to the maximum amount of members on each council would be eligible to receive a stipend. And the way that the estimate was calculated is at a $25 per hour rate, assuming that the average amount of time per meeting across all of our advisory boards is 2 hours. And so the calculation took into account number of hours per meeting, number of meetings per month, number of meetings per year, and that's how we got to the $114,000 estimate. So I do want to just share why this request is important and kind of fits into the role that I've been hired to help the county fulfill, and why it would help us kind of increase participation on our council. So there across society, there have been studies done that show that there are barriers to community participation on local government conversations and engagement on advisory boards and commissions, especially lately. Society there's been a larger ask to have community members with lived experience across the various type of councils that we have. So, perhaps the Veterans Board wants veterans serving on the council, or a Board of Health wants people who receive services in the health field and also perhaps works in the health field. And obviously in the Racial Equity Council, we are hoping to attract folks who have lived experience with racism or any other type of oppression or marginalized group. And so asking community members to provide their expertise in conversation with the county and in decision-making processes with the county. It's providing a stipend to community members who have that experience that can benefit us as a county and the services we provide. Really providing a stipend helps to amplify their voices and their experience, and it pays for the service that they're providing to us. The benefits of providing a stipend include reducing barriers to participation. So perhaps we have community members that are single parents that work a 9-to-5 job, that are commuting a half hour to attend meetings at this location. So we have to factor in childcare, we have to factor in gas, and childcare is expensive. And so we want to provide a stipend to help reduce those kind of financial barriers that participants might be experiencing, as a way to say we value your input, we want your participation, we want to engage with you. The stipend can help ideally support that kind of barriers that's been identified. It also promotes inclusion of individuals, again, with personal or lived experience. I think that we've had great representation from community members that have the privilege in being able to serve on our advisory boards and councils, have the time, they have the means, and they have the comfort in knowing that their voice will be heard. And we want to reach out to folks who you know, don't feel that they have a space for them, either financially or because of, you know, experiences in society or with local government. And so providing a stipend kind of promotes that inclusion in folks that we're hoping to attract across all of our boards and commissions. It also promotes dignity and equity. So again, now we have community members that have the means to participate, and if we're hoping to attract community members that really are struggling and regularly experience oppression or racism, we want to show support in asking for their expertise and guidance in how we serve our community. And so those are just some of the benefits. I'll throw it over to my colleagues on the council, and then I'll come back to talk more about options for funding, so that you know, you can consider other options, either fund all of it or part of it or whatever. So, Evelyn, get started.
Yeah, I was going to see if Juliet wanted to start, since she is our chair.
Evelyn, please go ahead. You have way more experience in this area than I do. So.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Evelyn Clark, and as Phoebe said, that I have been appointed to the council as one of the original members. I live in unincorporated Thurston County, so the Steamboat Island area, as we know, is not very diverse. And so I have a BIPOC blended family. We live out there. My daughter goes to Griffin, and are struggling with racism and discrimination. And we know the pushback from a lot of our members in our community don't believe racism exists and are not culturally sensitive when it comes to whether it's the school or even just how we live in our community. I have worked, well, I actually have lived experience with being incarcerated as a young person and have that experience of not having access to resources such as my white counterparts did. I also worked with young people in the community all over Washington state. I provided intensive behavioral health services, mostly incarcerated individuals. And then I also worked at the state government level and helped the team who oversees 0 to 25 behavioral health and substance use services with the focus on anti-racism. And now I am a national consultant, and I work on anti-racism efforts. And a lot of the work that I do is provide support to different states. I work on federal government TA centers. And one of the things that we heavily promote is that people don't do the work for free. It's tokenization. There's been many studies, especially on Black, Indigenous, and people of color who do this work. There's a higher burnout as we are providing our expertise and lived experience and still facing discrimination. I know that I can be white facing, but I have individuals in my family who identify as Black, and the moment that they walk out the door, they are subject to police brutality, racism, etc. So again, when I worked at the government level, that was a lot of things. I started councils, I chaired the Governor's Juvenile Justice Committee, and that was one of the things, is that we do not tokenize for their voices so that the systems can benefit from that. And as we know, Thurston County is not very diverse. We have declared racism a public health crisis. And so again, you're having individuals who face these things every day and then having to come to essentially, say this in a way, essentially make a system who is primarily white benefit off of our work. Again, I'm a national federal consultant. I also have my own consulting business. And so when we are even just being asked $25, I mean, I get it something, but it's still an equitable rate, as we know that the interim, we know from previously the county manager before is the highest paid county employee. And so again, if you think about power differentials, I mean, that's here right now, right? Like commissioners to me, I'm a community member, there's that power difference. And so when we talk about Again, payments, whereas last time we had a county manager that was not truthful with us and wanted our work for free, and knowing that he was getting paid, I mean, almost triple than what, obviously we weren't getting paid nothing. It was very concerning to myself and some other members. And so, again, when you think about leveraging power, if we actually want to do racial equity work, we have to tap into anti-racism. And one of those things when you dismantle white supremacy within any system is that power sharing. So if a county manager is making this much and they're saying you need to do this, that is modern day slavery. And I have tons of resources that talk about that, talk about the burnout, that talk about what modern day slavery is, as we know exists in the criminal justice system, but it also exists in settings as such. So I think that's all I got.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Juliet, do you want to come in? Or
For me, a stipend for committee members with lived experience is important. It is essentially putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak. If the county is saying that they are committed to promoting racial equity, then the members that are on the council with lived experience who would contribute to promoting racial equity should be compensated. It demonstrates a solid commitment from the county to its members. So from day one, this is something that the council members felt very strongly about. And I do believe that some sort of stipend will help to encourage members to join and to truly commit to the process of promoting racial equity. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to chime in. Thank you for sharing your personal experience. It reminds me of conversations that I've had. I know with the Law and Justice Council, they're having conversations as well on how do they get community members who have been in our criminal justice system involved in conversations with the county. But we know that folks who have been somehow involved in the criminal justice system struggle. And honestly, that is even outside of race. That is anyone who gets into the system is dealing with some form of barriers and getting back into the community and kind of reestablishing themselves. And so I think when we consider who we're asking to provide input across all of our boards and commissions, if we're targeting people who have the experiences that I may not have, that like all of us may not have in our lives, I think that supporting their efforts and their contributions with a stipend, it does show that commitment from the county in supporting racial equity work and equity work in general. And in the packet, you all have a letter by our other council member. I don't know if you need me to read that or if it's okay that it's in.
I've read it myself.
Okay. And so that letter is from Dr. Jackson, who also is advocating for my board approved stipends across the county. So before I get into the options, do you have any questions?
Commissioner?
I just want to throw out that Jason, who's not here, but he and Evelyn had a long conversation and he was very supportive. I don't want to speak for him, but along the same lines as what Evelyn has described. So I just wanted to let you share that with you guys come up.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner.
The 114,000 that you've come up with, does that cover, if you want to call them indirect costs, but associated costs? Like I could envision easily a bookkeeper trying to keep track of this and making out who gets what check and what meetings and all that. as a whole nother, process, and by the time you do wages and benefits and the whole thing. So, I mean, I could easily see this being 200, over 200,000.
That
In reality.
That estimate does not cover indirect costs. Part of this conversation, there is a policy draft in the works that should you approve the budget request, I would come back to you at a later date with a draft policy that would lay out the logistics. Based on the draft and based on conversations that I'm having with other localities, ours would end up being a manual process. I know ours would be a manual process and kind of tracking who's showing up to the meetings with City of Lacey, and they have technology that really helps this effort. And I think that is something we could consider at a future date, but right now it would be up to like staff liaisons to manage who's attending. As far as like the overall analysis, I think that, I mean, I'm comfortable taking on that role, but as far as implementation of ensuring members get paid, that would be additional workload on our finance team, I think.
How many other jurisdictions, including the state, that are around here locally do this?
Right now, I know of City of Olympia and City of Lacey. I haven't heard
Is
from
that the one where
Tumwater
it's the
yet.
33,000?
The analysis you have in front of you is Olympia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we know from Olympia, do we have any, has Olympia figured out, like, because it's an optional thing there, right? And that was one of the proposals, and I just wondered if Olympia was like half the people, taking advantage of that, just so we have a good sense of.
I spoke, so this is based on a conversation I actually had with City of Olympia, as they were going through their stipend program, and so anecdotally, they were told about 17% of members across their boards have opted in. City of Olympia is kind of a similar timeline with us. Their program won't start until 2024, so they don't know yet what that would look like, but City of Olympia has a different method where they, you can opt in, but you have to opt in within the first 2 months of the year if you're already a member, and then first 2 months of you being appointed to a board. So, and that was in the effort of reducing their administrative burden and reducing the fiscal impact if folks don't opt in time. So that is something we can consider. Is, folks have to opt in at a certain time. All of that would go into the policy that would come to you after, based on how you move forward with the request.
How about the state of Washington?
I don't know their logistics. I have to look more into. I don't know their logistics, how they manage it yet.
The last agency that I worked for, we had committees. We would offer stipends to the non-employee members of the committee. So anybody who was a department employee, that was part of their job. They didn't get a stipend. If the committee required members of the House or Senate, they were covered because that was part of their job. But if we had community members, we offered a stipend to them.
And the governor's office, the Office of Equity, has a specific policy document, and I believe that we can collaborate with them. In addition, King and Pierce counties to compensate members of their councils with lived experience who are doing the work of promoting racial equity. And I know for King, some councils in King County, it goes beyond even just hourly stipend. There is also a one-off payment for technological resource for individuals that identify as part of a marginalized community. Evelyn, I'm sure you're aware of a few boards that does that.
Yeah, actually, I was just asked to be on the Department of Fish and Wildlife Anti-Racism Board, and they just sent a chart, and so they actually are giving a stipend for childcare They're paying for members to get there, as you said, gas, and they're also paying them hourly rates as well. Yeah, yeah. And in the work that I do, I mean, federally, nationally, we also give stipends to individuals that we ask to be on committees, close to $500 per meeting.
And there are, in the research that I've done, the average that I saw was $25 an hour, but there's localities who do a flat rate per meeting, a flat rate per year, a different hourly rate. There's localities that will do an hourly rate just for the meeting, and then a separate hourly rate for any additional engagement efforts, be it town halls or, attending community events. And so there's a variety of ways to implement this.
What's the jury do, jury compensation?
Jury compensation is set by the state, and they have a program through Jury Plus that basically prints out who was in attendance and how many days, but it's basically a manual check-in that the staff member has to do.
And what do they get for a stipend?
It's very low.
$25, it's at that high.
It's low. I know they get mileage and daily stipend, but it's very low. And right now it was just updated, so I'm not sure if that's gone into effect quite yet because there was the jury diversity bill that passed.
Juliet, I wanted to ask you, when you were saying about King and Pierce, it sounded like you were saying that their compensation applied to certain types of work that was being done versus across the board,
Right.
committee, every person.
I am sure that DV has looked at the Office of Equity, that is the Office of Equity for Washington State. It recommends that, it stipulates that members may be compensated who fall into a low income category and also who have lived experience. So if you have someone a volunteer on the council that is Caucasian, does not have the lived experience and is earning well above 400% of the national, what's that called? Income. I was just looking at their website, the Office of Equity. That individual, for instance, would not meet the criteria for compensation. In order for true equity to be promoted, it is imperative that individuals who falls into the low income category and those with the lived experience, in this case, racial equity, those are the individuals that have been identified and recommended to receive compensation.
Yeah, and in some of the councils that I work on in different, like I said, the federal and national levels, we actually end up paying those who, like if it's something about anti-racism or equity, we do pay our BIPOC subject matter experts actually double because we do consider it hazard pay when they have to not only do the work, but again, they walk out the door or they can be in this room and experience discrimination, unconscious bias, right? Like when we actually dive into the work, what that means. So we do offer that. I don't like to call it hazard pay, but it's that additional
The extra burden.
Yeah,
And
I mean, yeah, it takes a toll. And research again shows time and time again, people who identify as BIPOC, really in any organization, anything you do experience more burnout because they have to face racism and biases and end up paying way less than their white counterparts.
We're also rehashing our own trauma every time.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
absolutely. And in addition, individuals with the lived experience, as Evelyn said, are offering their expertise. When I identify as an immigrant, I identify as a Black woman, Black Caribbean woman, and when I sit on the council, I am applying my expertise. Similarly, Evelyn and every other member of the council presently, we are, to us, racial equity, it's not just a buzzword, it is a way of life for us. And it is something that we are extremely passionate about. And we have unique perspectives that can help to advance this goal. And so that is why various councils and the state of Washington has stipulated and identified that people be compensated when they are given their expertise to advance racial equity.
Thank you. And then I have some
I'm gonna
questions.
ask Evelyn, so we're new to this, obviously, and I understand the argument for doing this across every committee. I mean, I see good value to that, but if financial resources made it difficult to go to that, is it, I don't know how to phrase this, but is it acceptable or reasonable to apply those criteria that Juliet described? I mean, if we were to start out, if we were financially only able to start out with sort of folks with lived experience in the lower income bracket, the criteria that she said the governor's office, I guess, applies, is there anything unacceptable about that, and from your perspective, in terms of getting this sort of idea started?
Yeah, I mean, I personally would ask what makes somebody low income and to say like who has the means. I mean, yes, you know, I work full time and I have a good job, but I also go to school and I have to pay out of pocket, right? I have a family, I have a daughter who does expensive things like cheer, you know, so it's like to say like I kind of have an issue with that, to say like, well, you only make this much, maybe you can get a stipend versus like, you know, so yeah.
In your case, Evelyn, you have lived experience, and the Office of Equity for Washington State does have specific guidelines. It is the calculation examples. It's 400% calculation for family of 4 household income could not exceed 120,000. So there are specific guidelines, there are specific ways to calculate.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, and as I said, in your case, Evelyn, and in the case of every other member of our council, well, the 7 members, 6 members, there is lived experience.
Yeah. And I do want to share, so one of the options that I have here to discuss is providing stipends only to community participants that identify as BIPOC or as having lived experience related to the advisory board on which they're serving. And so that is an option. One of the concerns that I, expressed in providing these options is who's deciding, like who's evaluating that lived experience is relevant. And I personally and professionally would be uncomfortable doing that. And given that the makeup of the county is largely Caucasian, that is another barrier, is now who has the power to decide who is low income, who has lived experience that's considered relevant. And not only that, I would want to, if that's something you'd want to pursue, I would reach out to the governor's office and figure out how they determine that. Because
the information is there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also there is specific government policies law that is online that talks about I'll put it here in the chat and you all can look at it. But it also is in keeping with what the Washington State Office of Equity specifies.
I would
Okay, so I'll pull that up and I'm gonna post it right here for everyone to see.
I don't think that the chat is enabled
Yeah,
in
if
these
you'll
meetings.
send
Oh,
it
it's
to,
disabled?
yeah, Julia, if you'll send it to Devi via email and then she
Yeah.
can share it with the full board.
Will do, absolutely.
Thank you.
So, yes.
So for me, well, first of all, thank you both for Evelyn and Juliet for coming in here today and sharing your experiences and advocating for this. I do have a couple of questions, but first I'm going to touch on the on that piece that Devi was just talking about on who gets to decide. And since I've been on the board, we've been just doing a lot of cleanup on our advisory boards and going through them. And our clerk of the board has, you know, gotten to a place where we have appointments, and I feel like at this time, we just don't have that infrastructure in place to have someone be that authority to decide, as you said, who has lived experience, who is a person of color. Like, it would just, I think, really unbalance the power dynamics, and it's just, and it would make me very uncomfortable as well. I had a couple of questions in regards to, I guess I'll start with the Board of Health. So, because that was one of the boards that you touched on, but they're not on the list. So when we were discussing the Board of Health, and there had to be someone who had lived experience or who had an adverse effect in our health systems, that was the legislation. And we had these conversations of like, well, it's really hard to get someone who with that lived experience to participate in the board if there's not going to be compensation. And from those conversations, I think it was, we were unable to pay for it because of something in the legislation. And so I'm wondering, are any of these other boards, advisory boards, do they fall under that same structure too? Like, I'm wondering, the salary commission, for example, that's kind of like stated by RCW, is that one of them where we can't do it because of specific legislation that is there? Or some of
Are they
these,
even on here?
yeah, they're on here.
Oh, Citizens Commission.
Yeah, and so just, are there any other ones? And you don't have to, I know that I'm asking this
Yeah,
now, so I'm not
I'll have
expecting. So you can look into that now,
Yeah.
right? Because that might change also the, I'm
It
guessing
would,
the ones that are here locally that we have created as board, as a board, those would qualify, but I'm guessing the ones that are state mandated might fall under different rules. And so I'm wondering kind of which ones are those and which ones,
Board of Equalization.
yeah, that's another one that I'm,
Example of one that's not even.
the Timberland Regional Library, not sure if that one falls. And then the second is the infrastructure. Was, when we first discussed this, I had several questions in regards to not the idea of compensating people for their time that they're putting into this work, but in terms of the internal structures that we have, considering that they're not great. And so just basically who it falls on. I think Commissioner Edwards touched on those internal costs. I'm wondering in terms of, is this, will it be easier once we have the ERP fully in place? And this is a huge system upgrade that we're going through, just for Evelyn and Juliet, that affects basically all of our financial structure. And wondering if once we have that system in place next June, is it something where we won't have to do it manually, right? Is it, a system where we can do it?
No, that wouldn't be a system that would
Okay.
necessarily make this easier.
And so depending on how the conversation goes, in looking at policies that have been established in other jurisdictions, I think City of Lacey, if I recall correctly, said they were actually advised not to do W-9s. Other jurisdictions do W-9s, so like the actual form that gets submitted by members, we would have to run that by legal to see what they recommend for us.
Yeah.
The behind the scenes that I would kind of incorporate into my workload is evaluating the attendance and kind of confirming that these folks are actively participating on the board and have attended these meetings, and can then, you know, somehow get that to finance, say, yes, they should be paid. But as far as actually evaluating like the financial information that's being submitted, that I would want to leave with finance.
And so with the Regional Housing Council, we set up an affordable housing advisory group as well as a homeless services advisory group. And during that time, the Regional Housing Council decided to have stipends for members, specifically because of the lived experience and the work that they are supposed to do. And the City of Olympia, you know, was like, we already have a system in place, we can take it on. And it came later on that the amount of workload that it would add on would be, it was too much for their staff. And so then I volunteered the county to kind of look for a contract to kind of see, is there something else? And I'm gonna turn to Robin to see, is something similar to that, right? Where we have contracted with someone else, or are we doing it in-house?
For,
The payments for the Regional Housing Council Advisory Boards.
I don't know. I do not know. I would have to check with Tom how that's
So-
being.
My curiosity, I'm curious to see, is that something that could be added on, right? If we are to go through this process.
If the board chose to offer stipends, then it would be internal to the county. We would be processing the payments. And we do that, there's one board that I know of, the Board of Equalization, that is entitled to reimbursement. They're entitled to per diem for the days on which they meet.
Entitled or required? I think it's required by RCW.
I think we have to pay them.
Yes.
Entitled, required, I'm using that word in the same way. So we pay their per diem, and that is processed by the staff to the board, the Thurston County staff to the Board of Equalization. So the part of how I imagine this working is the payments would be processed by the staff to the whatever board or committee we were talking about. I too would be uneasy making a determination of who would be entitled to the stipend or reimbursement or payment.
And then probably the reason you haven't heard from Tumwater, as I've been kind of poking around and asking, knowing that this conversation was going to come up, is because part of their budget proposal this year is that they're going to be doing a study. One of the things that they've heard from their advisory board members, and I believe Juliet, you mentioned this, it's not just the stipend, but it's childcare. Evelyn, I think you mentioned it as well. It's childcare, it's different factors, it's mileage, it's, and so they're going to be doing like a comprehensive study on, you know, what it is that their community actually needs. And I thought that was pretty interesting because they're localizing their information. And I believe the City of Olympia recently did a study as well to kind of see how their the stipends that they're offering has improved participation in some of their advisory boards. And so wondering if you can kind of reach out, DV2 Tumwater, to kind of find out exactly what it is that is in their budget proposal. The planning commission would be, I'm wondering, since that one is set by RCW and the state, if that's.
I don't know, we would have to look. Commissioner Minzer has his hand up.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm kind of back to where I was before. The other, I think in Juliet's description of some of the other jurisdictions, I heard, it might have been King County, I heard calling out a certain type of work as being like, because I think, I'm looking at in the Olympia and memos we got, I think it's problematic to have race be any kind of a qualifier for a stipend or not, but if you called, but I heard a reference to a certain type of work being done, and it sounds like we already have discrepancies. We have
Absolutely.
Board of Equalization folks are getting compensated, and Housing Advisory Committee people are getting compensated, and Racial Equity are not, and Board of Health are not, and Agricultural Committee or whatever are not. So we already have a variety of approaches. So could the commissioners call out, and you and I have had the conversation, I think the council's having conversation about expanding and diversifying the Racial Equity Council itself. So could we call out that type of work as being something to qualify rather than, would that be an option for us rather than going across every committee, every board across the whole county?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know your name, but you had mentioned like when you work for the state. And I think that too, so some of us are representing organizations, right, that we work for. I'm not sure, Juliet, if you're representing your full-time job. I'm not representing my full-time job, so you bring that experience. I'm representing my consulting business where, you know, when I'm asked to do things, I'm getting paid. And so that was another thing when I was doing state, that I worked for the state, so I couldn't get compensated, but there were some individuals with lived experience, but because they were representing their agency, they didn't take the stipend. You know, if they took time off, and that's the other thing, sometimes hours conflict, and so I have to take time off of my full-time job because I'm not representing them. I think that has to be taken into consideration too, like, are you gonna represent? I know we have, I don't know how this happened, but we do have a county sheriff, and I believe when he comes, he does not represent the county.
Right.
So,
we have a county employee that is in our criminal
which is
justice.
not supposed to happen.
And he's not a employee.
Yeah.
We had that discussion before, and Evelyn, when you were working, I don't remember where, but that is something you had mentioned. But I want to say for most of us, when we sit in, we're not representing our organization. However, our organizations are aware that we are members of the council, and somebody else, I didn't get the name, but somebody spoke to this specifically, that if it is a state employee, that state employee cannot be compensated. It's a lady in blue, I believe. We didn't get full introduction, so, but yes, she mentioned it. And I do believe that using the category of work that is being done is an excellent way for the compensation. Anything that is centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that needs to be identified as a top priority for Thurston County, and as such, that is a justification for compensation.
I was just gonna not push a little on that, but just, I guess, maybe broaden my own horizons, right?
Okay.
We have a variety of advisory boards that do different things, and I guess this is more for the Board of County Commissioners, and in terms of, I want everyone to remember the incident with Mercy and the Agricultural Advisory Board, which is an immigrant Black woman comes into this advisory group, and she ended up leaving because of
Racist
the
attack.
racist attacks that she faced, right, within that. And she was advocating for minority farmers. I mean, you know, when we set her on there, she brought kind of a different
expertise.
that different expertise. And while there's not a specific section in some of those advisory groups, sometimes when we have an interested member who wants to join that, right, we're like, you know, for me, Mercy brought in a minority farmer that are very rare in Thurston County, but she also brought in like urban farming, and she brought with her that experience. And so I was like, you know, she's going to be representing a specific, so while she was not specifically aligned to the work, sometimes as a minority person, you're doing the work in whatever setting you're in, and just because of your experience, who you're president, who you are. And so I guess with, you know, just aligning that just to the work for me, right? I feel like then we're ostracizing other members who are joining these other advisory groups who are perhaps not doing racial equity work as a whole, but they're also bringing in that lived experience to other committees.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is why the Office of Equity, once again, it speaks specifically about compensating individuals with lived experiences and those from low-income backgrounds. Because the example you just gave about Mercy, that is a good demonstration for everything Evelyn said about the burden that BIPOC members of a committee or board faces. I know from working in an organization that's 98% Caucasian, whenever I sit in on a team or so, I am bringing in unique perspectives of a minority from groups that are marginalized, disenfranchised. I am bringing in the perspective of our immigrants. So there is always that need, whether we go the route of what Evelyn said, is done in some of the boards she has worked with, of compensating those with lived experiences more, or whatever, but lived experience, it's always a main factor, because that individual has to work twice as hard. It's emotional labor, it's reliving trauma, and the individual has to be dealing with discrimination from the very people that they are working with sometimes. Individuals with cognitive biases and so on and so forth. So it is an emotional labor. So my advice, my recommendation is we speak with somebody from the office. DV, we could reach out to the governor's office, new racial equity manager, have a meeting, get their perspective, get some logistical information, and so on, and come back to our Board of Commissioners with a full recommendation.
And I do want to add, really quickly, you know, in the work that we're doing, there is a focus on race. But in conversations that I've been having and what I've put into the plan and my approach is that if we address race, we are able to address other marginalized groups.
Yes.
So I don't want to lose that intersectionality that exists, you know. Yes,
Absolutely
we
not.
focus on BIPOC people, but there are folks who have, you know, sexual orientation in which they face discrimination or mental health discrimination. And so, yes, we want to focus and address race as a huge issue in society, but when we do that, we're able to address other groups as well. And so I don't want to lose those groups in this conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, if I may, there individuals, okay, it's racial equity, but within that, each individual has several identities. I said here a few minutes ago that I identify as a Black Caribbean woman and an immigrant. So my identity, I am not just a Black woman. I am a mother, I am a wife, I am someone who grew up in a poor single parent household where we experienced eviction and so on and so forth. So as Devi said, there is a great level of intersectionality.
Evelyn, you made mention of your representing your consulting, is that what you said? Consulting
Yeah.
business?
Yes, I don't represent like my full-time job where I work on like federal and national, so I use a separate email purposely, and it's my own consulting where I do trainings for organizations on anti-racism and speaking engagements and all of that.
On racial issues? I couldn't hear exactly what you said.
Yeah, I focus on justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. So whether that's providing mental health support to agencies, I always have that anti-racism lens when I do trainings.
And that is something else that's also important to note. Of the 6 members, most of us, apart from the lived experience, we are trained. I am a certified diversity executive, for instance. I am also a diversity and inclusion specialist. Dr. Jackson is also trained. Evelyn here is trained. Jason Clark is. I am not sure specifically with Marlon Evelyn. Hioki is trained as well. So we all have various training and background in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And if I can add to that, I think in other councils and advisory boards, there has been that focus on the professional expertise that people can provide. And I think there's that shift again on that lived experience. We want community members who may not have had the opportunity to get professional degrees or accolades, but their life has given them knowledge, and their pursuit of equity in their own personal life has given them experience that really could benefit how we have conversations about the services we provide.
I guess I'd ask, Madam Chair, are we contemplating doing something from a budgetary position during our budget deliberations this week on this?
Yes.
I guess I'm uneasy about moving forward, I guess some of the issues that you brought up, but we're talking about laying people off and eliminating 80 full-time positions in the county budget. And at the same time, this could be, I don't want to overstate it, but I've seen bureaucracies before when something starts, and like in this case, okay, initially it's 100,000, but we know the reality of bookkeeping and all the headaches that go with it. Pretty soon it's another FTE, and pretty soon it's 300,000. And is this the proper? I'm not saying that the value isn't there. I'm just saying, is this the proper time to make that decision when we're gonna be possibly issuing pink slips, so.
What, and just like that's the reason you hear my question, searching for maybe a more limited, because I think it is their time, given where our racial equity work is in this county. I think it really is the time. Our council is just kind of getting back up and we're working on our plan and we've got our prices, I mean, I think the time is now, which is why I'm searching for maybe something more limited than that's gonna, if I can get 80% of the value for 20% of the cost to get this moving, this idea moving forward, that's what I'm searching for.
Can I make a proposal? And I guess my proposal would be, let's start with the Racial Equity Council and set that foundation. So it's sort of foundational public health. There could be a connection there. So there would be no impact to the general fund. We can see, and then it would also give DV the opportunity to look on maybe a broader policy in terms of the Office of Equity from the state, looking at King County's policy as well as Pierce County and maybe other counties who have similar policies, and how we can broaden it, but also not constricting that time. And we're going to include everyone right now without knowing the full picture, without knowing which of the boards qualify by, state law or which ones don't. It would also give us the time to look into that and maybe talk with Tumwater about their study as well and what they're proposing. But, so that's my recommendation, since it's just a first step in trying to address the work that the Racial Equity Council is doing, since I could see there's a connection with foundational public health. And we can make that connection in addressing that first step, right? And be responsive to the needs and concerns that the Equity Council has brought in front of us. And then we can it will give us the time to also look deeper into the other advisory boards.
Because frankly, the Board of Health is a perfect place where we need it, but you're saying I think you're right, that state law, Romero, back when we were considering this, state law doesn't allow us.
I think that we need to look at that again.
Okay, well, I'd like to go there, but
Yes.
I just want to share, because the Board of County Commissioners budget sends us to various trainings, and I need to share that back to my seatmates, because I got sent to the Access for Justice conference that the state put on just a few weeks ago, and this issue was front and center at that conference in almost every panel discussion that I attended. So I want to share that was just underpinning everything we've heard from our owners, but just trying to add that information that I received at that conference.
So I think we start with a pilot, that will be fine. We do have,
Robin, when you say pilot, that would be fine, let's put a caveat in there, pending legal has to give a kind of advice we get from legal before we step over that threshold, that's all.
I absolutely agree, because we do have an opinion, if you will, from the internal auditor that if we're gonna do one, we really need to be broad to them all.
We gotta start somewhere.
So
We gotta
that's
start.
why I'm saying, if we frame it as a pilot, we may be able to move forward and take the first
I
steps.
wonder what that's based on, because I'm already hearing that we don't. We're paying the Housing Advisory Committee councils and equalization.
Well, the
We
housing.
pay
that's why
the- we pay the Board of Equalization because
RCW.
that's required by law. And I was not aware that we were paying the housing.
Well, it's not, that was a regional housing council decision, and so it's kind of like a body who made that decision.
But what is that?
The county money, they can't find the county's money.
It was through, and I have to, because this was way back when we set the advisory groups up.
Yeah, I think I remember voting on that.
And it came in front of the Board of County Commissioners and we approved it.
I don't recall that.
Yeah,
because
and-
that's what launched us down this path.
And so, because the conversation, and was, one of the reasons I was advocating for it was because
these groups that had specific lived experience now had to rate all these grants, and the amount, I was like, I remember the amount of work I had to do for that, and now we're asking people to volunteer and rate all these grants. And I was just like, it's not really equitable that we're asking those people to provide their feedback that we're going to be back and making decisions on, and have them do all this work without actual fair compensation. And so that's when we decided, right? And
I recall all of that, and we've been working with Tom Webster on this policy since then, and I was not aware that payments were actually being made.
I thought payments were already, because they've already done the work. So I thought it was a decision that we hadn't made and that maybe it had.
Let me check on that and see, because I also recall that City of Olympia declined to make the payments under their policy. Yeah.
Well, I just want to make a point there. My point is that I don't want to hear an argument that we have to do everyone unless I understand what it's based on, because we're already not doing it. We're already doing something, not others. So the argument has to be better than it. I mean, I need to know what that's based on.
So my understanding, the ones that we're currently doing are the ones that are mandated by state law. However, if there are payments now being made to the housing, the subcommittees of the Regional Housing Council,
which I don't know.
Even if that were true, even if the ones we are doing now are mandated by state law, what does that have to say about why we couldn't do others that we choose to do? Just like state law is choosing some and not others, why can't the Board of County Commissioners choose some and not others? And why are we being told that it has to be everyone? I mean, there's a good argument for it being everyone, but I just want to know what my actual options are, because just saying we have to do them all, well, why? We're getting that.
I will certainly loop back. I am sharing the advice that we received.
Okay.
So, but there is a proposal that I've put forward, just to kind of circle back, and whether it's named under as a pilot or not, just kind of want to get back to that decision, I guess, and give direction to
And
DV.
Oh,
Notice,
yes.
but we need to give direction to DV on like what the next steps are.
I'm happy with
Your proposal makes sense to me.
foundational public health, we know is an option.
I believe so, and again, I'm suggesting we frame it as a pilot, yes, I think that when it comes to equity, we could use foundational public health funding.
Well,
We're gonna have to double check.
I want to say that I've been advocating that DV's wage structure ought to be transferred over to
That
foundational
is
public
part of
health.
the budget decisions, and I would counsel the board that we did not advertise this meeting as one where decisions would be made.
Oh, okay, well, I'm not
We'll
making
go
any
into
decisions
that
yet.
in the budget.
So the original request for a DEI person in public health was going to be paid for out of foundational public.
Yes, yeah.
So, okay, so then so DV,
More
just
to
kind
come.
of with that proposal that I've put forward, and kind of structure that policy, and then it will give us time to answer the other questions, and have conversations with our internal auditor, as well as look internally within our own infrastructure, kind of see how that's going to work out, see, how, if we're to broaden it, what that would look like. So just answer those multiple questions, maybe touch base with the Office of Equity as well as the other counties mentioned here today. Here's King, and not sure if there are other counties that Evelyn and Juliet know that are also doing this, but maybe having some, and maybe touching base with Tumwater on what their study would include, because I am interested in that. So that will give us time to answer those questions as well. Well, Juliet, Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us today and really having this conversation with us. And
I want to thank you guys. We wouldn't have gotten to where we are without you here today. So you've just given a perfect example of you know, the community, helping to advance county government. So thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay,
Are we coming until 1:30?
okay, so we are until 1:30 and then we will be back.